Oh my. Their dirigible was the biggest ever made. A planetary model built back in Germany by Friedrichshafen nach Einmal and shipped up in 2029, so that it had just recently arrived. Update. It is now 2029. OMG. Oh, the humanity. It was a planetary model built back in Germany by Friedrichshafen nach Einmal and shipped up in 2029, so that it had just recently arrived. Wait, how long was the flight out? Is it 2029 or 2030? It is approximately 2029 to 2030. It was called the Arrowhead, and it measured 120 meters across the wings, 100 meters front to back, and 40 meters tall. It had an internal ultralight frame and turboprops at each wingtip and under the gondola. These were driven by small plastic engines whose batteries were powered by solar cells arrayed on the upper surface of the bag. The pencil-shaped gondola extended most of the length of the underside, but it was smaller inside than Nadia had expected, because much of it was temporarily filled with their cargo of windmills. At takeoff, their clear space consisted of nothing more than the cockpit, 2 narrow beds, a tiny kitchen, an even smaller toilet, and the crawl space necessary to move among these. Cockpit. It was pretty tight, but happily both sides of the gondola were walled with windows. Oh wait, I read that right. It was pretty tight, but happily both sides of the gondola were walled with windows. And though somewhat blocked by windmills, these still gave them a lot of light and good visibility. Takeoff was slow. Arcady released the lines extending from the 3 mooring masts with the flip of a cockpit toggle. The turboprops ran hard, but they were dealing with air that was only 12 millibars thick. The cockpit bounced up and down in slow motion, flexing with the internal frame. And every up bounce was a little higher off the ground. For someone used to rocket launches, it was comical. Wow, they're really bouncing that cockpit. Earth is an average 1,012 millibars. 1,012 millibars thick on Earth, and it's only 12 millibars thick here on Mars. The cockpit bounced up and down in slow motion, flexing with the internal frame, and every bounce was a little higher off the ground. For someone used to rocket launches, it was comical. Let's take a 360 and see Underhill before we go, Arcady said when they were 50 meters high. He banked the ship and made a slow, wide turn. Dude, man's gotta know. He banked the ship and made a slow, wide turn, looking out Nadia's window. Tracks, pits, mounds of regolith, all dark red against the dusty orange surface of the plain. It looked as if a dragon had reached down with a great taloned claw and drawn blood time after time. Underhill sat in the center of the wounds, and by itself was a pretty sight. A square dark red setting for a shiny glass and silver jewel, with green just visible under the dome. Extending away from it were the roads east to Chernobyl and north to the space pads. And over there were the long bulbs of the greenhouses, and there was the trailer park. The Alchemist's Quarter still looks like something out of the Urals, Arkady said. We really have to do something about that. He brought the dirigible out of its turn and headed east, moving with the wind. Should I run us over Chernobyl and catch the updraft? Why don't we see what this thing can do unassisted? Nadia said. She felt light, as if the hydrogen in the ballonets had filled her as well. I'm not going to say anything. He brought the dirigible out of its turn, blah, blah, blah. She felt light as if the hydrogen in the ballonets had filled her as well. The view was stupendous. The hazy horizon, perhaps 100 kilometers away. The contours of the land, all clearly visible. The subtle bumps and hollows of Lunae. The subtle bumps and hollows of Lunae. The more prominent hills and canyons of the channeled terrain to the east. Oh, this is going to be wonderful. Yes. It was remarkable, in fact, that they had not done anything like this before. But flying on Mars is no easy thing because of the thin atmosphere. They were in the best solution, a dirigible as big and light as possible, filled with hydrogen, which in Martian air was not only not flammable, but also even lighter relative to its surroundings than it would have been on Earth. Hydrogen and the latest in super light materials gave them the necessary lift to carry a cargo like their windmills. But with such a cargo aboard, they were ludicrously sluggish, and everything happened in extreme slow motion. And so they drifted along. All that day they crossed the rolling plain of Lunae Planum, pushed southeast by the wind. For an hour or two they could see Juventa Chasm on the southern horizon, a gash of a canyon that looked like a giant pit mine. Farther east, the land turned yellowish. There was less surface rubble, and the underlying bedrock was more rumpled. There were also many more craters big and small, crisp-rimmed or nearly buried. This was the Xanthe Terra, a high region that was topographically similar to the southern uplands, here sticking into the north, between the low plains of Chryse and Isidis. They would be over Xanthe for some days, if the prevailing westerlies held true. They were progressing at a leisurely, 10 kph. 10 kilometers per hour. Most of the time, they flew at an altitude of about 100 meters, which put the horizons about 50 kilometers away. It's about 11 miles per hour. It's pretty fast. I mean, downhill, We bouncing downhill. Most of the time they flew at an altitude of about 100 meters, which put the horizons about 50 kilometers away. They had time to look closely at anything they wanted to. Although Xanthe was proving to be little more than a steady succession of craters. Late that afternoon, Nadia tilted the nose of the dirigible down and circled into the wind, dropping until they were within 10 meters of the ground, and then releasing their anchor. The ship rose, jerked on its line, and settled downwind of the anchor, tugging at it like a fat kite. Nadia and Arkady twisted down the length of the gondola to what Arkady called the bomb bay. Nadia lifted a windmill onto the bay's winch hook. The windmill was a little thing. A magnesium box with 4 vertical vanes on a rod projecting from its top. Because science is measured in the metric system. Oh, also this is a multinational project, so they're also using the metric for science and for generality. The windmill was a little thing, a magnesium box with 4 vertical vanes on a rod projecting from its top. It weighed about 5 kilos. They closed the bay door on it, sucked out the air, and opened the bottom doors. Arkady operated the winch, looking through a low window to see what he was doing. The windmill dropped like a plumb and bumped onto hardened sand on the southern flank of a small, unnamed crater. He released the winch hook, reeled it back into the bay, and closed the bomb doors. They returned to the cockpit and looked down again to see if the windmill was working. There it stood, a small box on the outside slope of a crater, somewhat tilted. The four broad vertical blades spinning merrily. It looked like an anemometer from a kid's meteorology kit. The heating element, an exposed metal coil that would radiate like a stovetop, was on one side of the base. In a good wind, the element might get up to 200 degrees centigrade, which wasn't bad, especially in that ambient atmosphere. Especially in that ambient temperature. Yeah. Still, It's going to take a lot of these to make any difference, Nadia remarked. Sure, but every little bit helps, and in a way, it's free heat. Not only the wind powering the heaters, but the sun powering the factories making the windmills. I think they're a good idea. They stopped once more that afternoon to set out another one, and then anchored for the night in the lee of a crisp young crater. They microwaved a meal in the tiny kitchen and then retired to their narrow bunks. It felt odd to rock on the wind, like a boat at its mooring. Tug and float, tug and float. But it was very relaxing when you got used to it. And soon Nadia was asleep. Okay, when are they gonna fuck? This is boring. Love boat. Ooh. Oh, like, what? It's been 2 days already? What the fuck? Are they waiting for more room? You know, like it's kind of cramped because they got all the cargo. They're gonna have to push their beds together. There's no room right now, you know? They don't want to bang on the bathroom floor. But there's a whole cockpit right there. Okay. The next morning, they woke before dawn, cast off, and motored up into the sunlight. From 100 meters height, they could watch the shadowed landscape below turn to bronze as the Terminator rolled by and clear daylight followed. What? They could watch the shadowed landscape below turn to bronze as the Terminator rolled by and clear daylight followed, illuminating a fantastic jumble of bright rocks and long shadows. The morning wind pushed right to left across their bow, so they were pushed northeast towards Chryse, humming along with the props on full power. Then the land fell away beneath them, and they were over the first of the outflow channels that they would pass. A sinuous, unnamed valley west of the Shalbatana Vallis. This little arroyo's S shape was unmistakably... Oh, ad. Thank you. Man, I gotta work out the ad thing with the reading. It's so fucking annoying. Like, I just get pre-rolls, or I have to run an ad every 10 minutes or some shit like that. Or I get pre-rolls turned off for 10 minutes for 30 seconds of ads. Seems like a little fucked, if you ask me. I didn't get one? Okay. Then land fell away below them, and they were over the first of the outflow channels that they would pass. A sinuous, unnamed valley west of the Shalbatana Vallis. This little arroyo's S shape was unmistakably water-cut. Later that day, they lofted out over the deeper and much wider canyon of Shalbatana, and the signs were even more obvious. Tear-shaped islands, curving channels, alluvial plains, scablands. There were signs everywhere of a massive flood. A flood that had created a canyon so huge that the arrowhead suddenly looked like a butterfly. The outflow canyons and the high land between them reminded Nadia of the landscape of American cowboy movies, with washes and mesas and isolated shiprocks, as in Monument Valley, except here it lasted for 4 days, as they passed in succession over the unnamed channel, Shalbatana, Simud, Tiyu, and then Ares. And all of them had been caused by giant floods, which had burst onto the surface and flowed for months, at rates 10,000 times that of the Mississippi. Nadia and Arkady talked about that as they looked down into the canyons under them. But it was very hard to imagine floods so huge. Now the big empty canyons funneled nothing but wind. They did that quite well, however, so Arkady and Nadia descended into them a number of times per day to drop more windmills. Mind the tumbleweeds. So Arkady and Nadia descended into them a number of times per day to drop more windmills. Then, east of the Ares Vallis, they floated back over the densely cratered terrain of Xanthi. Again, the land was everywhere marred by craters. Big craters, little craters, old craters, new craters. Craters with rims marred by newer craters. Craters as fresh as if they had struck yesterday. Craters that just barely showed, at dawn and dusk, as buried arcs in the old plateau. They passed over Schiaparelli, a giant old crater 100 kilometers across. When they floated over its central uplift knob, its crater walls formed their horizon, a perfect ring of hills around the edge of the world. After that, winds blew from the south for several days. They caught a glimpse of Cassini, another great old crater, and passed over hundreds of smaller ones. They dropped several windmills per day, but the flight was giving them a stronger sense of the size of the planet, and the project began to seem like a joke. As if they flew over Antarctica and tried to melt the ice by setting down a number of camping stoves. You'd have to drop millions to make any difference, Nadia said as they climbed up from another drop. True, Arkady said, but Sachs would like to drop millions. He's got an automated assembly line that will just keep churning them out. It's only distribution that's a problem. And besides, it's just one part of the campaign that he has in mind. He gestured back towards the last arc of Cassini, inscribing the whole Northwest. Sachs would like to bang out a few more holes like that one. Capture some icy moonlets from Saturn, or from the asteroid belt if he can find any. Nadia's like, please God, me. Capture some icy moonlets from Saturn or from the asteroid belt if he can find any, and push them back and smash them into Mars. Make hot craters. Melt the permafrost. They'd be like oases. Dry oases, wouldn't they be? You'd lose most of the ice on entry, and have the rest disappear on contact. Sure, but we can use more water vapor in the air. Sure, but we could use more water vapor in the air. But it wouldn't just vaporize. It would break into its constituent atoms. Some of it. But hydrogen and oxygen, we could use more of both. So you're bringing hydrogen and oxygen from Saturn? Come on, there's lots of both here already. You could just break down some of the ice. Well, it's just one of his ideas. I can't wait to hear what Anne has to say about that. She sighed, thought about it. The thing to do, I suppose, would be to graze an ice asteroid through the atmosphere, as if trying to aerobrake it. That would burn it up without breaking the molecules apart. You'd get water vapor in the atmosphere, which would help, but you wouldn't be bombing the surface with explosions as big as 100 hydrogen bombs going off all at once. Arkady nodded. Good idea. You should tell Sax. You tell him. East of Cassini, the terrain grew rougher than ever. This was some of the oldest surface on the planet, cratered to saturation in the earliest years of torrential bombardment. A hellish age, the Noachian. You could see it in that landscape. No man's land from a titanic trench war. The sight of it induced a kind of numbness after a while, a cosmological shell shock. They floated on, east, northeast, southeast, south, northeast, west, east, east. They finally came to the end of Xanthe and began to descend the long slope of Syrtis Major Planitia. This was a lava plain, much less densely cratered than Xanthe. The land sloped down and down until finally they drifted over a smooth, floored basin. Isidis Planitia, one of the lowest points on Mars. It was the essence of the northern hemisphere, and after the southern highlands, it seemed especially smooth and flat and low. And it too was a very large region. There really was a lot of land on Mars.